When developing various fantasy or alien races for their fiction, authors often go into great depth on a lot of aspects of their culture and biology. Let's take the protoss, for example. Various StarCraft materials talk a lot about how this alien race works. They do not have a mouth, or, according to dev comments, any other orifices in their bodies besides the eyes. So the question is, how do they eat? How do they breathe? And for the protoss, the answer usually is either psionically or through their skin. We get to see a lot of their culture in games and books and comics, but there is one very crucial thing about them, a thing that influences a lot of any given people's culture that Blizzard refuses to address, and when asked directly, they only say, carefully, trying to avoid actually saying anything. And that topic is, of course, reproduction. That's right, folks. Today we're going to talk about reproduction in alien and fantasy races. Wait, no, not like that, not like that. I blame the rat behind the projector. See, this is the problem with talking about the topic. And the reason why I kinda understand why writers and game developers don't want to talk about it a lot. Because when you bring up reproduction, people either get horny or they assume you meant to be horny. However, I genuinely have a certain fascination with the topic. Still not like that? When we're talking about an alien race, or a race of fantasy creatures, the way they reproduce, rear their children, can influence a lot of their culture. And it really irks me that because some people can't address the topic in a mature way, we are missing such a crucial element of the fantasy of being a certain creature. Do you know what was one of my favorite third-party books in the 3rd edition of D&D? The Book of Erotic Fantasy. No, still not because of the horny stuff. Or the very graphic pictures of the goblin fertility goddess, which I can't show you on YouTube. But because of this table. It's a cross-breeding table showing you what races can breed with what other races. And I can't imagine it coming up often during play, like, hey GM, can I have a child with this dwarf or kobold? No, but this and things like mentioning how bugbears usually find their partners, it does help build these races to be more than humans with rubber foreheads. But because it's stuck in the book called The Book of Erotic Fantasy, it's relegated to fetish material. Okay, you want some non-horny examples? Here's some brief examples of my 2 favorite systems that I made up just for the people who still think I am being horny, because they assume you can't talk about the topic for genuine world-building reasons. Worts are a race of essentially fruits. They have a 2-stage life cycle. When the flower on their mother tree forms into a fruit, which then ripens, the fruit falls, and from that moment on, it awakens as a sentient, independent creature. They have a skin resembling the skin of a peach or a plum, pulp that can stretch and bend the way mussels do, bones made of wood resembling a fruit's pit, and hair resembling literal peach fuzz. They then go out into the cosmos and live and learn and explore. And by the time they wilt after a few decades, they try to return to their home, but if they can't and they die elsewhere, they ask their friends to take the pit inside them and bring it to their home world. There, the pit is planted and grows into the next tree, which carries on all their memories and personality and will, in turn, sprout more fruit like them, being taken care of by a cadre of worts who never left their homeworld. The other race I made up with a very unique way of reproduction is Hellions. Much like words, they do exist in some form in D&D, but they are never really elaborated upon a lot. Long story short, Hellions are a race of sun people. They live on the suns. They look like a humanoid shape carved out of a sun's hot plasma. Not star people, because that gives you a very different connotation. Much like a sun, they grow bigger and hotter with age, and they usually live a very long time, though different subraces, inspired by different kinds of stars, can live shorter or longer. When their time finally comes and they perish, they erupt in a supernova, and as they erupt, their essence ignites pockets of gas around them, and from those pockets of gas, new Hellions eventually grow. Now, if you look at these two races and you think the reproduction I talked about there is horny, I think that might be a you thing. That said, there is nothing inherently wrong with being attracted to or being horny about alien races. If you want to, how do I say it without triggering YouTube? If you want to have a sleepover with the fruit people, even though they don't have any organs, knock yourself out, imagine whatever you want. You do you. What does grind my gears is people who assume anything about the topic must be some kind of weird fetish I want to dump on people. And then writers and designers and developers who refuse to talk about how their very inhuman race rears children because either they fear fans would be horny about it, or they are actually secretly horny and can come up with serious answers, or with systems that are not just adding human bits onto creatures that are very inhuman. Here are some races from Blizzard universes, WarCraft or StarCraft, who beg for some further explanation of how their life cycle works, but which Blizzard seems almost panically afraid of expanding upon. Imps! Who doesn't love imps? Well, to be frank, no one likes imps. I like imps, as obstacles and annoyances to throw at players. Whenever they are an enemy on the field, they try to hit and run and try to kite you around the map, but as soon as you catch up with them, they melt like butter on a hot summer day. They are very, very fun to play as an opponent, but more importantly, there appears to be something going on with the reproduction system. You have tons of these little gits running around, being annoying, and then you have the imp mothers, with some very apparent themes tied to fertility, being called mothers or bearing names like Prolifica, or looking like that Stone Age Venus sculpture. You have this very stark sexual dimorphism that begs for explanation. Now, Blizzard desperately tries to avoid saying anything and ends up saying the imp mothers have a portal in their stomach, which implies the imps get summoned inside the imp mother and are then pushed out while already fully formed. And to be honest, that kind of sounds way more fetishistic than the alternative. So maybe let's not do that. I say, what if imps are like ants? Each imp mother has her own nest of a sort. Most of the time, she uses unfertilized eggs which spawn into these sterile drones, the common imps you fight all the time. Small, weak, and useless, they are cannon fodder for the Burning Legion. Sometimes, however, the imp mother fertilizes a few of her eggs and gives birth to the next imp mother, and a few bigger, stronger imp fathers, so to speak. Because they are demons, they are paranoid, angry creatures that immediately kick the mature fertile imps out of the nest. The imp mother then mates with those fertile males, sets up their own nest, and promptly eats the males. And then the cycle repeats anew. And that's how we get millions of useless little imps to beat up regularly. Not all the demons of the Burning Legion are as prolific as the imps. In fact, most demons do not reproduce in the way we do. Succubi use lust as a tool of control and manipulation. Some demons who come from mortal races are certainly still physically capable of the process, but their lives are bereft of joy and genuine pleasure or emotional connection with other people, unless it's derived from harming others. So Erdar, for example, still sometimes do it out of habit, sometimes for the purpose of emotional control, but they are largely infertile and require either external aid or mortal donors or vessels to create more demons. Or they simply corrupt more mortals. Being reborn in the nether when they die, most of the time, they rarely even need to replenish their numbers. One of the exceptions are the Moarg. Moarg are still one of my favorite demonic races, something I did talk about in the past, and all the different races among them suggest a very complex hierarchical structure. I imagine a typical Felguard is born in a test tube, brought up sterile without even the physical capacity to reproduce the old-fashioned way, if you know what I mean, all to make sure they never become a threat to their Forge Fiend masters. The same goes for the little stunted Gun Arg. The Forge Fiends are sterile as well, but in their case it is because they are simply so far beyond mortal desires that they just remove any unnecessary bits in the process of upgrading their bodies. To veer in a very different direction, let's go to the other major Blizzard setting, and that is StarCraft. Their reproduction is even a key game mechanic for the races, as in every Zerg game we spawn larvae and then mutate them into more Zerg, including drones which then make more hatcheries, which then make more larvae. We can't say the same about the protoss though. While in StarCraft Ghost there were supposed to be protoss hatcheries, the game was technically never released, and this is technically not canon. When asked about protoss reproduction, Blizzard gets sketchy and tries to avoid the answer, afraid people might accidentally think something horny. But once again, you don't have to be horny. I am saying the word horny a lot in this video. But once again, you don't have to be horny to imagine how protoss reproduce. To try to analyze how they do it, we have to take a careful look at how the biology and culture works otherwise. We were told they have no other orifices beside the... I'm also using the word orifice a lot. We were told they have no other orifices beside the eyes, so your typical mammalian system doesn't work. Or reptilian or insect, they don't have that system. Everything else they do, be it speaking or feeding, is done either psionically or through their skin. And in many ways the protoss resemble plants, without exactly being plants. So what naturally follows to me is that the protoss would reproduce psionically and through their skin. The protoss, at least the Kalai, are a very communal race. Deep interpersonal relationships are rare and seem mostly platonic. So at least the original Aiur protoss probably do not have marriages that stay together and raise their children. Sometimes, however, two protoss forge a deep emotional relationship, much closer than most human ones because of the psionic connection. When the couple decides to have a child, they perform a special psionic mind meld while touching each other. And in this process, both the psionic essence and genetic material merge together through their skin, and it soon settles somewhere on the body of one of them. We do know protoss have genders in some form, so we can say roughly half the population is capable of hosting this budding essence, and it just so happens their psionic voices sound more feminine to humans. Thus, Terrans translate the protoss term for them as female. This essence, this nascent future protoss, then separates from their mother's body and forms as a bud on their stomach. Once this bud matures enough, it dislodges itself, and the mother deposits it in communal hatcheries. Thus, the Kalai never raise their children and don't know their mothers and fathers, only seeing the Kala, the whole of the protoss race, as one big family. The Nerazim, the Dark Templars, are of course a little different. Without the psionic gestalt of the Kala, every connection between the couple is very individual and personal. Dark Templar mothers raise their children, presumably with largely monogamous fathers, leading to only the Nerazim protoss canonically mentioning having parents. There are more creatures in Blizzard and other games, especially in WarCraft, who we could expand greatly in these terms, like the Primals with the Podlings and the Botani, who seem to have a very distinct life cycle, being directly controlled by the Genosaurs and the Spore Mounts. Perhaps they all come from the same seeds, and the Genosaur decides which they sprout into. And you might notice I do a lot of plant stuff for these, because plants really lend to very inhuman reproduction systems. Or ethereals, who used to be mortals, all transformed in one ritual, so they wouldn't be able to naturally reproduce. Facing the same problem the Forsaken did in canon, their race is dying out. So in my version, the Brokers are a faction of those who developed through trying to replicate the ritual and converting other like-minded people, be they alien or Kareshi corporeals, into more ethereals, usually as a part of the Broker sect. This is so sorely needed because it brings up the topic of the existential crisis their race must be facing, a crisis more important for them than the Forsaken, who literally say, "What are we but slaves to this torment? By the way, let's bring more slaves to this torment." My Forsaken instead replenish their numbers by freeing Scourge from the Lich King's control. Or elementals, who are not just magical animals with no sentience. Elementals too can reproduce only through division, so they end up facing a dilemma in their life. They can consume more elements and more energy and grow themselves forever, or they can sacrifice a portion of themselves to bring something new to the world. And I really love this particular bit because it echoes something real people face in the real world. Do you just build your own career and keep everything to yourself? Or do you have children and sacrifice your time and money and health to bring a new life? Neither answer is absolutely correct for everyone, and every person decides what they really want to do with their lives. And this elemental motif reflects this very human struggle. And that is what fiction is really best at, showing us an echo of real problems, beyond just simple escapism. And because most writers are cowards, we never see that. I could go on and on about this for hours and all the different ways the very inhuman methods of reproduction could go, and keep lamenting why we never get to explore this in a mature, serious way. But I gotta stop myself somewhere, and I can already see the comments from people who clearly didn't watch the video or didn't understand a single word of it and still think I'm horny. Or maybe they understood just the word horny. They had the word horny and orifice repeatedly, and they said, it's talking about orifices. If I get a lot of comments, I expect a lot of those comments. I don't know, people who are somehow horny for the Helians. And if you are, good for you, mate. Each to their own. Do you think I missed the mark on some of those races and how they reproduce? Do you still think it's a taboo topic no one should ever talk about because of the puritanical American culture and the repressed urges that are released in the worst possible formats because of it? And that will probably be the reason why this video will never get monetized, even if the rest of this channel does. No matter how hard I try to avoid trigger words while still making sense. Or maybe there are other aspects of the biology or culture of other races that you think are also frequently missed or avoided. Let me know about any of those topics or anything else you think about in the comments below. I should see you next week with another exciting topic. Going back to talk about classes in an MMO, but a very different MMO. Probably not the one you expect, unless you watched the previous video to the very end. I hope to see you there, RPG grognards.